Imagine helping win a revolution against a distant government you believed had violated your rights, only to watch your own new government become strong enough to threaten those same freedoms all over again. That was the fear facing many Americans after the Constitution was written. The United States had just broken away from British rule, but now a new question loomed over the young republic. What if this new federal government abused its power too? What if it silenced critics, disarmed citizens, invaded homes, held unfair trials, or crushed dissent in the name of order? The Constitution created a stronger national government, but for many Americans, that strength came with danger. They wanted protections written down clearly and permanently. Not promises, not assumptions, guarantees. Out of that fear came one of the most famous additions to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments ratified in 1791. These amendments did not create freedom out of nothing. They were written to protect freedoms people believed they already possessed. In this video, we are going to explain what the Bill of Rights is, why it was added, and what each of the first 10 amendments actually means. When the Constitution was proposed in 1787, not everyone celebrated it. Many Americans agreed that the Articles of Confederation had created a government too weak to govern effectively. But others feared that the new Constitution went too far in the other direction. They worried that the new federal government would become powerful enough to threaten liberty itself. These critics became known as Anti-Federalists. They warned that without a written list of rights, the government could gradually become oppressive. They remembered British abuses vividly: censorship, arbitrary punishment, military pressure, unfair trials, and violations of privacy. To them, liberty needed to be spelled out in writing. Supporters of the Constitution, called Federalists, argued that a Bill of Rights was unnecessary because the federal government had only limited enumerated powers. If the Constitution did not grant a power, they argued, then the government did not have it. But that reasoning did not satisfy many Americans. They wanted explicit protections. The promise of a Bill of Rights helped secure support for the Constitution. James Madison, who had once doubted the need for such a list, ultimately took the lead in drafting the amendments. The result was a set of protections designed to place firm limits on federal power and reassure the public that the new government would not become the very kind of threat the Revolution had fought against. The First Amendment is the most famous because it protects some of the core freedoms of a free society. It begins with religion. Congress cannot establish a national religion, and it cannot prohibit the free exercise of religion. In other words, the government cannot force people into one official faith, and it cannot generally stop them from practicing their own. It also protects freedom of speech and freedom of the press. That does not mean every statement is wise, harmless, or true. It means the government cannot simply silence ideas because those in power dislike them. In a republic, criticism of power is not a threat to freedom. It is part of freedom. The amendment also protects the right of people to assemble peacefully and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. In plain language, citizens can gather, protest, organize, and demand change. Taken together, the First Amendment protects public disagreement. It allows people to worship freely, speak openly, publish criticism, stand together, and challenge authority without automatically being treated as enemies of the state. It is not just about personal liberty. It is about preserving the public space where liberty can survive. The Second, Third, and Fourth Amendments deal with power, security, and the boundary between the government and the individual. The Second Amendment protects the right to keep and bear arms. Its wording has been debated for generations, especially because it refers to a well-regulated militia. But at its heart, it reflects an early American distrust of centralized power and a belief that citizens should not be entirely dependent on the government for defense. The Third Amendment is much less discussed today, but its origins are clear. It says that soldiers cannot be quartered in private homes during peacetime without the owner's consent. This was a direct response to British practices that had deeply angered colonists before the Revolution. Even if it seems less relevant now, it reveals how strongly early Americans valued the sanctity of the home. Then comes the Fourth Amendment, one of the great privacy protections in American law. It guards against unreasonable searches and seizures. In general, the government must have probable cause and obtain a warrant that specifically describes what is being searched and what is being taken. Officials cannot simply burst into homes, rummage through property, and seize what they want without legal justification. These amendments show a shared principle. The Bill of Rights was not only about grand ideals, it was also about protecting ordinary life from government intrusion. The Fifth Amendment is packed with legal protections, and many of them are central to the American justice system. First, it protects against double jeopardy, meaning a person cannot generally be tried twice for the same crime after acquittal or conviction. It also protects against self-incrimination, which is why people have the right to remain silent rather than be forced to testify against themselves. The Fifth Amendment also guarantees due process of law. That phrase means the government must follow fair legal procedures before depriving someone of life, liberty, or property. Power cannot be exercised arbitrarily. Rules must be followed. The state must justify what it does. Another part of the Fifth Amendment says private property cannot be taken for public use without just compensation. Even when the government has a lawful reason to take land or property, it cannot simply do so without payment. This amendment reflects one of the deepest principles in the Bill of Rights. The individual is not powerless before the state. The government must act through law, not raw force. It must respect boundaries, procedures, and the dignity of the person standing before it. The Sixth, Seventh, and Eighth Amendments focus on trials, justice, and punishment. The Sixth Amendment lays out essential protections in criminal prosecutions. It guarantees the right to a speedy and public trial, an impartial jury, information about the accusation, the ability to confront witnesses, the power to obtain witnesses in one's favor, and the assistance of counsel for defense. In simple terms, the government cannot secretly accuse someone, drag out proceedings forever, deny them a lawyer, or prevent them from answering the charges against them. Justice must be visible, structured, and fair. The Seventh Amendment protects the right to a jury trial in certain civil cases. While it gets less public attention than the criminal amendments, it reflects the same distrust of concentrated power. Ordinary citizens, not just government officials, have a role in deciding disputes. The Eighth Amendment prohibits excessive bail, excessive fines, and cruel and unusual punishments. Punishment may still exist, but it must have limits. The government cannot treat human beings as disposable simply because they have been accused or convicted of wrongdoing. These amendments remind us that freedom is tested most severely when someone is unpopular, vulnerable, or under accusation. The Bill of Rights was written for exactly those moments. The Ninth and Tenth Amendments are often overlooked, but they are crucial to understanding the philosophy behind the Bill of Rights. The Ninth Amendment says that listing certain rights in the Constitution does not mean those are the only rights the people have. That is a remarkable idea. It acknowledges that liberty is broader than any written list. Just because a right is not specifically named does not mean it disappears. The Tenth Amendment says that powers not delegated to the federal government, nor prohibited to the states, are reserved to the states or to the people. This reinforces the idea that the federal government is one of limited powers, not unlimited authority. Together, these amendments make an important point. The Constitution does not hand all authority upward to Washington, and the Bill of Rights does not pretend to name every liberty worth protecting. The people remain the foundation of the system, and government remains limited by design. More than 2 centuries later, the Bill of Rights still shapes American life. Arguments over speech, religion, guns, privacy, policing, protest, fair trials, punishment, and the limits of government still define major political and legal debates. That is part of what makes the Bill of Rights so enduring. It is not just a historical artifact from the founding era. It is a framework for an ongoing argument about liberty and power. But it is also important to remember what the Bill of Rights was and was not. It was not a perfect solution to every injustice in early America. Many people were still excluded from the full promise of American freedom, including enslaved people, women, and many others. The existence of the Bill of Rights did not automatically make the nation just, and yet those principles mattered. Over time, later generations would invoke them in struggles to expand freedom more fully. Reformers, activists, lawyers, and ordinary citizens would point back to these words and insist that the country live up to them. That is one of the great paradoxes of American history. The nation often failed to honor its principles, but those same principles gave people a language with which to demand something better. The Bill of Rights was born from fear of concentrated power. It was written by a people who had just fought a revolution and did not want to trade one form of tyranny for another. So they placed boundaries around government and protections around liberty. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to assemble and petition, the right to bear arms, protection from forced quartering, unreasonable searches, unfair trials, self-incrimination, excessive punishment, and unchecked federal authority. These first 10 amendments became some of the most important words in American history because they answer a timeless question. If government is necessary, how do you stop it from becoming dangerous? The Bill of Rights was America's first great written answer. And that is why students still study it, courts still interpret it, and citizens still argue over it today. Because the Bill of Rights is not just about the founding era. It is about the permanent struggle to protect freedom,